All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry we're just a couple minutes late here. We'll go ahead and get started with the local government small business. And I see Supervisor May Perez is joining us via remote. Thank you for joining us, as well as Supervisor Rutherford. Boy, what's on the agenda today? Both you guys are here. I'm a little concerned. Oh, it's after the election. That's true. Very true. All right. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll go ahead and do a roll call, please.
Good morning, Paul Avila and Associates.
Rita Lou, Fratic International.
David Rothbart, Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts.
Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
Jeff Blake, Metal Finishers Association.
Eddie Marquez, Roofing Contractors Association.
Nancy Feldman, Council's Office.
Fabian Wesson, Legislative and Public Affairs.
Ben Benoit, AQMD.
Janice Rutherford, AQMD.
Al Baez, AQMD.
Vasilios Papapostolou, AQMD.
Stacy Garcia, South Coast AQMD.
Elaine Hill, South Coast AQMD.
Day, I am AQMD.
And Supervisor, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Very good. We can hear you too. All right. With that, we'll go ahead and get into the action items. For this, first off, the opening remarks. We already did that. Is there any other? Yeah, let's go into the minutes. Anyone have any questions on the minutes? Not hearing any questions. I have a motion and a second. Any opposed? So moved. Any of the follow-up or action items?
Yes, we have several action items. A request was made in June by David Rothbart for a presentation on emission reduction credits. Derek checked with staff, David, and staff is not ready to present at this time, but they are working on it. The next one was a request was made by Supervisor Perez to schedule a symposium in Eastern Riverside County, and we wanted to let him know that we will schedule an AB 617 meeting in 2019 in Eastern Riverside. Request was, did you get that, Supervisor?
I just heard it. Thank you so much for that.
All righty, thank you. A request was made by Rita Loof to provide a report on activities that SCAQMD staff is working on with CARB, and we clarified what you wanted. That was what we're doing with AB 617. We're working very closely with AB 617 and CARB, pretty much hand in hand. Weekly coordination meetings, they report at every AB 617 meeting that we have, whether it's the community meetings, the community steering meetings, so we're working really closely with them. It's mandated, number one, by legislation, and it's just a natural fit, a natural partnership for us. So that's kind of what we're doing. If you want more details, we can talk offline.
Well, I wanted this committee to get sort of like a recap of those activities, because we've heard that from staff in the past about the close coordination between the AQMD staff and CARB, but we're not privy to those communications. So I wanted the committee to get a recap on the specifics of what you just talked about.
Okay, why don't we schedule an AB 617 update for the next meeting by Dr. Jo K. Gosh. She's in charge. She's the coordinator for AB 617, so she can talk about emission reduction plans, things that we're actually going to be implementing. Right now, we're just at the beginning stages of doing it. We have formed the committees for the three communities that we have chosen. Two of the steering committees have met, one being last night in San Bernardino and Colton. Each steering committee consists of about 30 people, both residents, business, and community organizations, community-based organizations. Our next one is in East LA on November the 28th. But we'll make certain that this committee gets those flyers and that information. It is all posted on our AB 617 page, but we'll make certain that you guys get that via email. Okay, and also the community selection process, all of the steps that we did, that you should know that, Rita, so thank you for asking that. The next action item was to provide
Fabian.
Mr. Avila. I'm sorry, did we have a
Fabian,
question?
yeah,
Oh,
before
sure.
you move on from AB 617, one of the things that I responded to staff on in my email was, and I won't speak for Bill, but a couple of board meetings ago, Bill brought up the issue of how trade associations are going to be able to represent, quote unquote, represent communities and sit on these advisory committees. And again, we don't really see the details of those negotiations. So that would be an item that would be of interest to us to see, what the conversation was like. Thank you.
Sure, sure. We can also send you the makeup of the committees, who is actually on the committees, okay? Are any other questions on that? Okay, the next.
Fabian, I just
Sure,
had
sure.
not a follow-up question. I went out to the San Bernardino meeting last night. I saw you. I called your office yesterday morning before attending the Reclaim meeting because I wanted to. I was inquiring about the staff's presentation and the makeup of the steering committees and everything, and I was told that this was still a work in progress and it hadn't been finished yet. This is just a few hours before the 6 o'clock time. It would sure be helpful for those of us who are interested in it, if the staff could get this material up, at least 24 hours in advance. The only thing that was up on the AB 617 website was the flyer. Yeah, announcing it in both English and Spanish, but there was no material. I called your office. I don't know who I spoke with, and they said staff was still working on it. But
That's because we are still working on it. We're
I'm
still
sure you
getting,
are.
we're still getting submissions for the committees. We're still confirming folks that said they wanted to be interested but have not gotten back to us. Literally 2 days before the meeting, we had like 8 people on that committee.
Well,
And you saw last night we had 29 people come out. So it is still a work in process. We're still learning as we go.
Yeah,
This one last night was much better than the one in Wilmington, and I anticipate the one in East LA will be stellar. But we certainly appreciate any input. And if we're not getting this stuff up soon enough, we apologize for that. We will correct that.
This wasn't just the makeup of the steering committee meeting. This was staff's presentation, and I would certainly have figured that staff's presentation for that night would have been in order, because it really, I don't see them differing too much except for community boundaries that would change from location to community to community. But anyway, it's just I wanted to make a point, and you've noted it, and maybe it'll be corrected in the future.
We'll note that, and we'll speak to the coordinator about that. Thanks, Bill. We appreciate you. Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, this is on another one of my follow-up items, and I think staff said they're still working on it. I'm not ready to present, but just to reiterate the request for the update on whatever outreach activities have been entered into with the industry as part of the commitment that staff made in 2016, I believe, in May 2016, when Rule 219 was adopted. Staff made a commitment to the board to do outreach with the business industry about implementation of Rule 219, and we have not seen anything, so that would be my continued request.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Make certain we've got that. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, the last follow-up item was provide Mr. Avila with information regarding the Sriracha case. Is Mr. Avila here today? He's still not here. Oh, there you are. Yes, you are. Well, we are prepared to address your question today. Nancy Feldman, our Principal Deputy District Counsel, will address that. Thank you, Nancy.
No, thank you, Fabian. As I recall, because you were not at the last meeting, so I'm racking my brain to go back to the meeting before that, you were questioning the AQMD's participation. in the Sriracha lawsuit that was brought by the city of Irwindale, actually, against the Sriracha parent company.
A little, yes and no.
Okay.
Nancy, one of the issues that I just really wanted clarified was there was a fixed number. Let's say on the odor complaints, let's say that, pick a number arbitrarily, 10, 15. If there was 15 complaints, then it would generate an investigation by AQMD.
Oh, I see. So you're
Right.
really questioning more generally what our policies
Policies are,
are
correct.
regarding public nuisance.
Right, and then the number floated from 6 to 10.
Okay.
And
I'm going to give you a very brief answer, but because this is not agendized, we really can't get into it. If you'd like a presentation on public nuisance, we can certainly accommodate that at a future meeting. I'd be happy to do it myself if that's something that we.
Versus as determined in the current state law, health and safety code, which requires cost effectiveness calculations. The guidelines were most recently updated in February of this year. At that point, the updates were taken to the board. The board approved the updates. On this current proposed updates, we're going to be targeting 5 parts of the guidelines. The guidelines are made up of a total of 7 parts. The first part is the overview, which provides a background and of the guidelines, how they're implemented and so forth. And parts A, B, C, and D apply to respectively to major sources, and minor sources. So we're going to be targeting this go around the overview parts A, B, C, and D. The guidelines. I have Rita. Yes.
First, I just wanted to commend you and the BACT staff on implementing the board's directive. I think you really did a good job of, trying to update the guidelines. Secondly, I wanted to say that recently UV technology was included in the ARB-backed clearinghouse, so we're excited about that, and a lot of the listings that we're including in these guidelines here at the AQMD were incorporated, and ARB used those, so it's a testament to your work on that. And we also provided additional public comments for your consideration, so we're looking forward to that.
Thank you, Rita. Yes, as I'll mention later on, we've been working with CARB on AB 617 and the back bar clearinghouse component that the legislation requires. Thanks. And as I mentioned, we gathered cost data for this proposed updates, and also we looked at how to maintain consistency with new or adopted or amended rules that would somehow end up being backed. And we continue to work on making our BACT guidelines, which is a living document, ever more friendly and user interactive, so that it can provide a better experience for the regulated community and the public when they reference any information off that document. Quickly, the first update to the overview section is we're going to be incorporating by reference a recently adopted policy memorandum by our engineering and permitting division, in which they clarified the circumvention of our 1 pound per day or greater applicability for BACT. Whenever a new piece of equipment modified or relocated would result in emission increases of criteria pollutants that are equal to or greater than 1 pound per day, BACT applies, and they have to implement the latest modern pollution control technologies. Well, it was discovered that several facilities were coming back for 0.7, 0.9 emission increases once, twice a year. And over a period of 2 years, it could be like well over 1 pound a day. And they never had to implement any emission control equipment or BACT. Well, that policy memo was established, I think, this year, that now requires facilities to look back over a 5-year period and to see over that 5-year period if they have submitted any applications that would take them over the 1 pound a day emissions. So we're incorporating that. We believe that was a very important policy to include in our guidelines, so that it can be referenced when equipment is being installed, modified, or relocated. That is an engineering and permitting memo. I think it's best if you go through LACI, I believe, and they can provide, I believe, at the Permit Streamline Task Force Committee. And I believe Amir mentioned that they have that memo linked on our webpage.
Al, I'm sorry, is that a memo or a policy?
A policy memorandum.
So it is a district policy.
It was a memo that was established, yes.
Okay, it would certainly be helpful if I would be one that would be.
I can take your message back to Lockheed.
So that the entire committee would get a copy and include it.
Excuse me, Tom just mentioned, it's already on the website. I know engineering mentioned they had that link for that memo on their on their website. And Tom can answer exactly where.
Yeah. Since our last SRC meeting, I think you requested that memo or that guideline document to be on the BACT site, and which already been linked in the BACT site.
Okay. And similarly, back in September of 2011, a air quality related energy policy document was established, which included a back reference for new repowered and basin fossil fueled power plants to incorporate layer and back, considering energy efficiency. We're also incorporating that memorandum in our Part A policy by reference. Part C, which applies to minor source backed, we are, again, including that energy-related policy document. And since whenever BACT is being established for minor sources in accordance with state law, we have to consider cost. We have maximum value cost per ton figures that whenever we update the guidelines, we looked at those figures and we update them consistent to the Marshall and Swift index, so that those values reflect at that time of amendment of the guidelines, the current cost per ton values. Yes.
Do you, after you publish your projections of what the costs are going to be, do you ever review that and say, and find out what they actually were per ton?
Well, those costs were established back in, I believe, 2005, and they're scaled up in accordance with the Marshall and Swift index on a cost per ton basis. So we do establish, we go back whenever we, for example, are proposing a new minor source backed. For example, if we're requiring a controlled piece of equipment on a small business, we would actually approach the facility and ask, how much did it cost you? And based on that information, we compare those costs to those figures.
You have that record someplace?
Yeah, and we're going to be proposing that in our board package.
Yeah, because my observation has been, for my particular situation and those in my industry, is that's never been done. We've never had actual cost requested from our budget to meet the advanced vapor recovery. This was, what, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and you're proposing new ones now. And we've never, I don't know of anybody in our industry where those costs have been requested.
Are those based on new proposed rules or amended rules?
No, I'm talking about going back, after you propose, after you have established, when you implement a rule. In my particular case, you implement a rule, we have a budget. I mean, if you run a business, then you go measure. You measure the results against your budget. Your budget is remove so many tons of pollutants out of your plants, correct? At so much cost per ton.
Perhaps I should clarify. Under this program, we update the BACT guidelines, which is
no, but you don't. But you never go back and check and see, did that happen?
Yeah, you're on two different pages.
Yeah.
What he's asking is, when you pass a new rule, you tell the community what it's going to cost them to be in compliance. They go out and they do it. Does anyone ever go out 6 months or a year later and verify that the actual cost meets the number.
We'll need to check on that because I'm not be the right person to answer regarding planning and rules policy.
Well, that's the question.
Yeah,
Al, what is the threshold for minor source back now, cost effectiveness?
It depends on what criteria pollutant you're talking about. NOx, SOx, they all have different costs per ton.
Okay, so it's not like a reclaim or anything like this where.
No, in reclaim, that in rule development, they use a cost per ton basis. And in BACT, we have a set guidelines for certain costs that whenever we establish BACT, as you know, Bill, you're part of the BAC Scientific Review Committee. We get in touch with the actual facilities, get their input as to what costs, real cost for the installation of the equipment, and then we compare that to our established cost per ton values.
So if you have a facility in Simi Valley or something like that for a low NOx burner or something like that, they report their cost to buy it, to install it, to operate it, and everything, and that becomes the cost effectiveness threshold for that for that device at that facility, correct?
Well, BAC, as you know, is case specific.
Right.
So if that equipment, thermal oxidizer, was installed in a food processing type facility, there's a certain BAC that applies for that type of operation, and we'll use it for that.
The assumption being that like facilities could achieve it at the same or
with the same class
cost, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's how that's done.
And I'm sorry I can answer because if that's a rules question, I'm not in the planning rules division, so I cannot answer for them. I'm in the BACT group, so I apologize for that. Okay, here we go. As I mentioned, the BACT documents is a living document that ever evolves as new modern pollution control equipment or processes are being developed. And this outlines the categories that we are currently, the new, we call them BACT or layer determinations that we're including to the guidelines of an achieved in practice technology. First one is an external floating roof storage tank that implements a canopy to reduce the emissions. Second is a soil vapor extraction system that achieves, I believe, 30 ppm NOx. The third is one that we are looking forward to update. It's been a while since we last updated gas turbine achieved in practice emissions, and we're going to be outlining, I believe, various categories for gas turbines fueled on natural gas, whether they're combined cycle, simple cycle, to landfill gas, digester gas, and produced gas. In addition, we have categories that apply to portable engines and emergency fire pumps. Our BAC guidelines in those categories, emergency or portable equipment, essentially mirror the CARB ATCM requirements. And these are examples of equipment engines that have achieved those tier levels. I heard earlier talk about AB 617. Our group, the BACT group, has been over the past several months working and having conference calls with CARB regarding AB 617 and the deployment of the BAC bar clearinghouse. Along those lines, we discovered that several of the older established determinations for equipment were outdated. So to be consistent and make sure that the public and regulatory community is actually, when they reference our document, they actually see current up-to-date listings. We went through the document, and these are the categories of equipment that we are updating or deleting to be replaced with new up-to-date backed and layer listings. Again, for minor source Part D, we are proposing a new category for thermal oxidizer for certain types of operations as a control technology, along with cost will be included in the board package. For DFAT fryer, I should mention we continue to strive to update, to clarify our document, and whenever we see an existing back determination that we feel needs clarification for the benefit of the public and regular community, we do that. That's the example of the fryer. defab fire was there and identified one type of fryer. We felt that that's not helping the cause, so we are modifying this to be more clarifying and also reference it to from direct fired defab fryers to non-integrated defab fryers, to be consistent with the requirements of Rule 1147 that applies to those non-integrated defab fryers. Composting, a lot of times in the recent years, in fact, to a certain extent, BACs have been driven by new rule adoptions or rule amendments for composting operations. Rule 1133.3, I believe, has been established, and that's currently requirements. So we're referencing BAC as compliance with that rule for composting operations. For the boiler, similar for Rule 1146.1, we're making that reference. For the other, process heater, printing, and spray booth, we're just making corrections to those categories to be consistent with what's currently been permitted. For example, for the printing and graphic arts, when we in February of this year, when we published the document, there was an omission of a column in particulate matter for printing and graphics that was not included. It should have been included, so we're making that correction. For spray booth, for example, there's a limit in pounds per month that to be consistent with what's been permitted over the years, we're making that correction. So there's nothing new, just we're polishing and clarifying all these existing backed categories. And as I mentioned, Rule 1147 applies to many combustion equipment. To be consistent, we're updating all these categories that apply to 1147 to reference back this compliance with Rule 1147. These are many categories that involve combustion. And several years ago, we established a charter for our BAC Scientific Review Committee. Back in 1995, the board established a committee that whenever we propose new updates to our guidelines, we hold public meetings, and this committee gets a chance to review and comment on our proposed updates to the guidelines. This charter specifies how the committee is made up of, the members and so forth. And one of the things that also includes is reporting. Our BAC guideline, our committee that we normally go to before going to the board for approval is the Station Resource Committee. The reporting before stated that after every BAC SRC meeting, we would go to the Station Resource Committee. Well, that was not quite the intent, because we like to go to the Station Resource Committee when we have some proposed updates that have been vetted by the public and by the committee, the SRC committee. So we're clarifying that reporting guidance to say that once the proposed updates to the guidelines have been presented to the BAC SRC committee at a publicly noticed meeting, along with a 30-day comment period, followed by a final BAC SRC committee. At that point, we feel comfortable to taking the proposed updates to the guidelines to the Station Resource Committee. David?
Yeah, thank you for going over all this, and I have to give you kudos, especially where we were a couple years ago and getting everything updated. Really appreciate the effort. On this subject, I mean, it's just sort of getting to kind of a head here with AB 617 and all the rules going to backed levels. I started thinking, as far as what we're doing right now, we're kind of playing catch up with the backed SRC, is trying to say, okay, here's things that were already permitted, and let's just memorialize it. And with everything coming at once, I think my desire, and I don't want to speak for Rita or Bill or others on the backed SRC, but it would be nice to have something that's a little bit more formal as far as having a process where we go through and make sure that backed is well vetted and goes through a process. I understand what you're trying to do here as far as when you go to the public, when you go to stationary source, but as a member of the backed SRC, I think it'd be nice to have a more formal process, which the backed SRC is not like a committee. We don't have, a recording. We don't have minutes done the same way we do for other committees, and having it more transparent, because we're coming down to getting lower and lower and lower and more challenging to get to these back levels. I think it does need to be more vetted than it has been, rather than playing catch up. Is maybe a simplistic way of looking
When the
at
committee was established, as a committee that would review our proposed updates. And this year, we're going to just schedule our third back public meeting for the proposed updates. So I believe we're trying to be as transparent as possible. It's a pseudo rule development process, as you know. Whenever we update the guidelines, we put together a board package that's been, for this year, it'll be like 3 Steering Source Committee, 3 back SRC committee meetings along with a 30-day comment period. So we try to go to that extent. What you're asking is something that would require a board action.
Yeah, I understand that's something that this committee, that SRC is not set up in that way. I'm sort of kind of asking your opinion as far as where things are going, how to catch up, what your thoughts are, and as far as kind of where we're going and what we really need. We had talked about getting extra resources, and I had talked to Wayne Nastry, and I think he agreed that we need to put more effort into this type of process.
I agree. I mean, we try to do the best we can right now as a staff of 2, Tom and myself. And we appreciate all your comments. As you, with Rita and Bill, that are members of our back SRC committee, we appreciate the feedback you gave us, and you gave us over the years and the past months. And these times, a lot of changes are happening, rules-wise, and other, like for example, AB 617. So we try to work in conjunction and try to be in the same wavelength as where the rules are going. But then again, we have our process and how we go about establishing BACT. So I appreciate your comments and
you got to remember, we had a 10-year hiatus.
I always like to correct you, Bill. It was 8 years. It was not 10. It was 8. Feels like Rita.
Comment on that, Al. If you recall, several years ago when we first submitted comments, we specifically addressed the issue of the charter, and following up on what David was saying, the difference that we saw between this committee and other committees is that the BACT committee was an advisory committee to the staff.
That's right.
And we didn't really have a board member. I mean, other than, this kind of indirect process of going through stationary source, we didn't have a board member like here, in this committee. We have a couple of board members, 3 board members, and we didn't have that process. So that was a concern to us. And I'll give you the engineering policy memo is a perfect example. I mean, that's a huge policy issue that was just decided on internally without any board member oversight. But that's also like a mini rule. And I know I dealt with those issues years ago with the engineering department on the emissions calculation issue. So.
Thank you. I have my ADO here. We'll take that into consideration, and I'll discuss that. Yes, sir.
If this thing passes, how long would it be before all the rules that it affects all those permits would have to be rewritten?
This does not impact rules. This is separate than a rule development process. This applies to, of course, piece of equipment when they're permitted, but this is not a BART. BART is the best available retrofit control technology. This is a BACT. It applies to new, modified, or relocated. So BART is applied to the rule development process. This guidelines, the BACT applies to new, modified, or relocated equipment.
There is interaction between the two, right? I mean, if it's
sure.
If it's BART, you got to look at the specifics, but it could be BART and BACT.
In certain cases, BACT equals BART, yes.
I'm concerned about 16 and setting the precedent and going over to BART, but also I want to enter into the record the 510 pages of the clerk's transcript from appellate court and litigation that I am in Public Solar Power Coalition had with the district, and the state. This is in the, for the 12 plan litigated in 13, 14, and we're going to continue and pursue this. But also, we had to exhaust our administrative remedies, and I'm also entering into the record 20 pages from the Federal Register from September 3rd of 14 in reference to reviewing the plan. And so specifically, the copy I've got isn't very good, but on number 15, they respond to solar power, and this is from the Environmental Protection Agency, and there's considerable problems with this. They say that they could not use bark at all because it was state law and they're federal, and it's supposed to be implementing federal law, but that's kind of garbage. And they discuss about CTGs, Controlled Technology Guidelines. And we looked into that, and they say that, you know, they're not established. And looked back into this and did research on this. And, you know, you have to go like 10, 15 years to find stuff. And there's, anyway, it isn't being dealt with. And I'd just like to say that we brought this up with BAC and entered the solar plants that were the largest solar power plants in the world out here, 354 megawatts built by the Israelis. And they built a 14 line focus concentrator. When a power tower was built by the government, they spent over $100 million to like $10 a watt, and they spent it for like $3.50 a watt. Anyway, after that they built 30s and a couple of 80 megawatts, and it was out at Kramer Junction and Edwards, Daggett, and it's proven and been operating for 30 years plus, and working with the folks that have that experience and whatnot, and trying to get that, bring it to the district, and have been actively involved in that. But in reference to these technologies, have this in the record, and in a way, I wish I could read it out, but there's
we don't have quite the time for that today.
Yeah. Anyway, you know,
about 30 more seconds.
So, you know, the government's been negligent. They haven't looked at solar as controlled. When I spoke to the board, I got support from Adrian Martinez, with used to be Sierra Club, and now he was in RDC. Now he's Environment Earth Justice, and that's basically got their support, and have heard from other folks. So we got to decide what to do. I mean, is this going to be dealt with like up front? And this is backsliding also. In the 78 and early 80 plans, you had that in 1164 and stuff was in there. And in the 91 plan, and it's backsliding.
All right, Harvey,
so,
I got to cut you off there. You had 3 minutes on this one.
All right.
We'll have 3 more minutes of public comment, okay?
Well, I'll make other comments in public comment.
Okay.
Okay, so this is all in the record.
All right.
And other comments related to that. I was communicating with Winky Taxes, the person that.
All right, we got to move the meeting on here. But all right, with that, any other questions from the?
I think I'm almost done pretty much,
sorry.
Chair Benoit. Yeah, it's. I just want to say one more thing, that we're also working on updating the guidelines, making it more user friendly, and this is shows an example of an equipment category link that we added to our BACT guidelines online. Make it easier whenever you want to identify a process or an equipment that you like to find out what BACT is. You can go there, click, type, and be able to get there. Last slide here. We went through just finished our 30-day comment period. We are have currently scheduled the next BACT SRC meeting, I believe, is for December 11th, Tuesday. And at that time, we're going to be going over the comments we received and response to comments, and continue working with CARB on AB 617 and the establishment of the online BACT clearinghouse. And we're targeting going to the January 18th, I believe, Station Resource Committee meeting, and to the February 2019 board meeting for approval of the proposed updates to the guidelines. And that concludes my presentation.
Great. Any other questions, anyone? If not, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item, which is our attached written report. Any questions on that? Not seeing any. Anyone have any other business for the body? Fabian?
I know it's listed on the agenda, but just wanted to make certain that everyone knew the December meeting will be held at Central, Basco, and Chino. The item on the agenda for the meeting will be the 2019 goals and objectives. Please submit any suggestions for goals and our objectives to Stacy Garcia, please. It is December 14th, I believe. Yes, Friday, December 14th. Forgive me.
Very good. Okay. With that, we're at the public comment portion. Harvey, do you have 3 more minutes? Do you want to sit up here where we can get you on a microphone, or?
All right. Okay. There's a few things. First of all, there's activity in that I'm not familiar with, and you folks are, in Riverside and in Chowchilla for community choice, and the proper place is this committee for local government, because this is local government. A community choice, maybe not everybody knows, it's that was started when Enron was gaming the state, and PG&E went bankrupt. Edison was moments from going bankrupt. The state was going to buy out the transmission and distribution center of PG&E for $1, and that was on under Davis, Republican governor. For a couple of weeks, and it didn't happen. The state subsidized $42 billion through the general fund and Department of Water Resources to subsidize the investor-owned utilities. Okay, now a question has come up. The CCA was started at that time. The investor-owned utilities, the cities and counties. We've got LA County, unincorporated, Ventura County, and 30 cities. So they continue to bill through the investor-owned utility, and they supply the power, the solar and renewables and whatnot. So it's a hybrid. Now there's like a war going on the withdrawal fees and what they call stranded assets. And there have been committee meetings here, and I was let out of a meeting that was discussing this. For instance, 25% of the PCIA, this withdrawal fee, is for Diablo Canyon. There's the shareholders that went and they put this in. They were going to put nuclear power plants every 15 miles on the California coast 40 years ago. I was involved with the anti-nuclear pro-solar movement. I had the first local solar job in Santa Cruz County as the solar education specialist in 77, 78 after teaching a solar class at UC Santa Cruz. Anyway, now community solar. I've been asked to put in proposals to major CCAs. The largest one in the state is here in LA County and Ventura. And now Edison comes. I've been going to meetings, spending a lot of money going around trying to get this information on community solar. It's happening in other states, and our state is just nothing. And they say I could not get the information. They say that it just didn't work, and they've got a program they want to like take in Walmart and have them do 80% and 20% for like low and middle income on community solar. And as a proposal to the PUC, it's got to be stopped. Anyway. That's one thing. I'm incorporating into the record here that I did a study 40 years ago in 78 through 80. I worked with Tern and the fellow that worked the Orange County nuke. Mike Florio is one that told me about that $1 deal. But that was their expert list for Turn. It was started by Sylvia Siegel. She was a labor organizer for the nurses union. She retired in '73 and started this to reduce, save money for folks. She wanted to bring PG&E's energy conservation program to our energy program in Santa Cruz County. So that's how we got involved. And they've literally saved over $10 billion. And this is not in just energy; it's also in transportation and communications. So this was a study I did for the first black solar commissioner, Leonard Grimes. It was on the first, they were supposed to look at models of financing solar. and it was the legislative intent was everything, not just investor-owned utilities. That's what they did. For instance, there were
Harv, if
6
you'd
solar
wrap it up
municipal
here.
utilities at the
You've gone
Energy
beyond your
Commission,
3
and they
minutes
didn't
now.
report on it. Anyway, I'm incorporating this in the record. It's called it's 142 pages, and that needs to be redone. It is in the record in planning and rules through the computer program that they're working on to do 1,500 houses and solar and whatnot at a time.
Very good. Thank you for your comments.
All right.
All right.
Oh, one more thing.
We're at our time limit, and
Okay.
a few of us
Well,
have other things we need to get to.
Looking seriously at that we know how many people are dying, and they're not reporting all the people that are dying from the air pollution and climate change.
All right.
And
Thank you for your
and
comments.
that's premeditated murder. And it's in also the 92 plan that we litigated is now in the record in the 510 pages.
Thank you for your comments.
And
with that, our next meeting will be December
give it to
14th
council.
at 11:30. Hope to see you all there. Thank you for have a great day, and hopefully everyone can get back to their other offices they need to get to with the Friday traffic.